Better Buildings for Humans is powered by Advanced Glazings, makers of the Solera line of products. Solera is the leading glass glazing made specifically for architectural daylighting and with extreme insulation performance. Learn more at advancedglazings.com.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Better Buildings for Humans. I'm your host, Joe Menchefski, and this is the podcast where we talk about the impact that the built environment has on our health, our wellness, our productivity, and our general joy of being alive. And we talk about sustainable design as well. Today, speaking of the general joy of being alive, I have Marta Delgado with me. Marta, it's a pleasure to have you here. Finally, we get to speak.
Thank you, Joe. I'm really excited to be here as well.
Yeah, Marta's from the Center of Conscious Design, and we're going to talk about that in a little while. But let's learn more about her. Let's learn a little bit about your background. Okay, let's start with the question of, why did you decide to study environmental design at Berkeley? And how did you come to practice neuroarchitecture and, in general, architecture that supports the development of healthy people and societies?
Thank you, Joe. I was thinking about this beautiful name you have for the podcast, Better Buildings for People and for Humanity. And that's precisely what I've always wanted to do, better buildings. Like, I always thought we could do a better job. I grew up in a very normal apartment, but in a city that had incredible works made by Gaudí and architects of all epochs, from, the Romans to the Renaissance, to the Baroque and Art Nouveau. And I could really feel very different when I would walk in one of these mansions or in one of these buildings that were beautifully crafted by artists, architects that had an understanding of light and material and form and decoration. And then I would walk across to another neighborhood that had one of these very bland, depressing gray buildings. And I felt very different in those environments and always ask myself, why are we not doing more of the nice stuff? Yeah, so I also had a big curiosity for the mind and what makes people thrive and be happy. And this interest in architecture, my mom is an architect as well, and there's other family members, my uncle, that are also architects. So I was sort of in between. Do I study the mind, maybe neuroscience, maybe psychology? Do I study architecture? And then I learned that there was actually an intersection. At the time, I learned about it through this name, neuroarchitecture. And I thought, brilliant, this is perfect. This is exactly what I want to do, to build better buildings by understanding how the mind works, and therefore creating places that are going to appeal to the mechanisms that in our mind create meaning and create joy and create health. So I knew that I needed to go abroad to study these things, because in Spain, there wasn't any program in the world at the time. When I was making these decisions, there wasn't much training in this intersection. There was some in Zurich, and I did do a visiting semester there at the University of Zurich. And then there was some in London, and there was more in California, because in 2003, the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture was created there. And that's what pulled me into moving to California. And once I was accepted in Berkeley, I thought that it was a great institution to study, because they had an interdisciplinary program in which I could take classes outside the Department of Architecture. So I ended up learning about cognitive science and psychology and anthropology and all of these other human sciences and how they intersect with space. But I did want to say something else about this word, neuroarchitecture, that with time, I've learned that it's not the word that I want to use for defining my practice and what I care about, because there used to be this dream and this vision that by studying the brain, we would get answers on how to make buildings that help us navigate them better, feel better in them, meet people and connect better. And that's actually been a little frustrating to see that over 20 years of research, there's not that many results that neuroscience alone can give us that are applicable to architecture. And the more I've learned about the person, I've realized that it's pretty much in the body and the emotions and in those social connections where the magic of space happens. more than, just on what's above your eyes. So I like calling what I do research informed design, because I'm looking at research in so many different fields, not only neuroscience, and especially I think psychology and kind of behavioral sciences and environmental psychology are sciences that can tell us a lot about how humans interact with the space without knowing exactly what happens on the brain, because that's the reality. We can't know very well. The scientists, the most knowledgeable scientists on the brain, still think it's a big mystery. So I'm really glad, that I did this development, and being in California and in Berkeley definitely helped me to get to this point and have this awareness on like this relationship between people and places.
That was an absolutely brilliant answer, Marta. And on top of that, it was probably one of the best explanations of neuroscience that I've heard, and a very insightful look at the state of the science as well. So I appreciate that you've looked it directly in the eye and are recognizing how it needs to be approached, or one of the possible approaches. I absolutely love it. I want to talk about the Center of Conscious Design, okay, that you're affiliated with. Does it have a physical headquarters? Is there an office somewhere? And if so, where is that?
So the Center for Conscious Design is a global movement and a global platform. The founder is located in Tel Aviv, Israel,
Okay.
but we don't have any headquarters. It's thought as a grassroots movement, like a bottom up more than a top down, and it has chapters all over the world. So the idea is that the CCD, which stands for the Center for Conscious Design, is the organization that supports our fellows. And fellows are independent professionals all over the world who decide to support their careers by creating a chapter in their cities. So we have, from Conscious Denver, Conscious Barcelona, Conscious London, Conscious Bengaluru, Conscious Lima, like all over the world, there's chapters. And it's a system that always allows for more people to create new chapters where there are, and to focus on the local problematics, because we believe very much on this, think globally, but act locally. So the idea is that the center brings together all these professionals with this vision of learning together and envisioning practices and principles to make buildings better for humanity, and then giving tools and support to all these people across all these chapters to do that work locally. And when I say do their work, the goal of the Center for Conscious Design is not to actively be involved in projects, it's to give education and basically help people become conscious, which is in the name. And we become conscious by asking ourselves better questions. So we're there to always ask new questions about how this built environment relates to people, how much information can we gather from it, what do we want it to look like, and support fellows on leading these conversations where there are. Now, these fellows are also architects or designers or scientists, researchers, who are going to do work and are going to do projects and could collaborate with, the local administration and other professionals in a town to build things that improve the lifestyle and the lives and the health of people living there. But the Center for Conscious Design is going to be there as a support organization, helping all of these fellows develop themselves and their work outside of the CCD. So that's what we do. And I joined it about a year ago, very much from this realization that neuroscience alone and the sciences alone were not going to give us all the answers, and that it is very much like this attachment to place and this love for where we live, which is a big part of having joy in the built environment, is loving where you are, comes from those personal relationships between people and space, and that it had to be, decentralized organizations like this one, like the CCD, to promote this very personal and local connection to place, and that it was never going to come from a top-down organization and kind of way of knowing, like, science is pretty much structured around this way of knowing and generating knowledge. So I'm really happy to finally be in a place that I really see and believe how that its mission is going to have a real impact in communities worldwide.
Manage the connection between building occupants and the outside world using Solera translucent glass. Learn more at advancedglazings.com.
So do you follow the science model where different communities would critique each other's work as a way of getting feedback and as a way of testing the validity of, say, particular claims?
The science model of, you mean having a hypothesis and then designing an experiment, testing it out, gathering results, then analyzing those results, and then coming up with conclusions and new questions?
Yeah, let's say the back end of the scientific process, in that when you publish the results of your experimentation, you open it to the community, to the scientific community, for, to see if they can duplicate it, and then to just express criticisms. Do you do something similarly with CCD?
Now, this is a very interesting idea. I don't think we work exactly in that way. Those are definitely principles that we believe in and that we think are important to share information in a way that others can replicate it. But the scientific method works very well in laboratories and in closed environments. Here we're talking about such a specificity of circumstances that bring together a community and a building that's very hard to point out at what is working, what is not. And the goal of the CCD at this point is to support these fellows in starting these conversations. We're not even there where we can gather a bunch of results and analyze them and share them and be like, okay, this way of organizing a neighborhood seems to be positive for developing better intergenerational connections between this and this group. We're not there yet. Are some of the questions that researchers and scientists ask themselves, and we definitely look up to this, bodies of knowledge and the labs that are doing this research. But from the CCD, what we do is sit together with all these fellows and support them in leading conversations and bringing awareness and consciousness in their communities. So we are going to look at other researchers that have shared their information, and as fellows, we're also sharing and publishing about the work that we do as professionals, but we're not there yet on having all this data as the CCD, of collecting all this data. But that's definitely a beautiful idea, and it would be great to get there someday. What we are doing is Itai developed this framework that's called the Conscious Design Principles, and it's 12 principles that would support a design process become conscious or have this positive relationship with design, with science, and with the communities in it through collaborative and actions, and through trying to make design as responsive as possible, trying to be responsible, sustainable, etc. And it could be a brilliant idea to, in the future, gather as much information as we can from how people are implementing conscious design principles. But we're not there yet. We're beginning, and we hope to be, a movement that grows slowly but surely with the collaboration of all these people across the world.
Yeah, oh, that's wonderful. And I wasn't suggesting that it was necessary. I'm just curious if the process went that way. It certainly would be more difficult with something so incredibly subjective,
Exactly.
as an individual's experience with a particular space and a particular community group. You don't have the same sort of theoretical universal objectivity that you do with science. But sometimes peer criticism, or at least peer review, can be very powerful in moving a field of study forward. But I want to change subjects. We talked about that a lot, and there's so many things I want to talk to you about. So forgive me for just moving on at this point. But I read one of your articles that you wrote on the CCD's website, and it struck me that if I really focused on that article, it would be a lovely way to sort of walk through a good conversation about what was the term you used? The research-driven design?
Informed design or research-driven design?
Perfect.
I like
Okay.
info.
Yeah, I like informed too, actually. So on the website, you wrote an article called "Designing for Well-Being in High-Pressure Environments," and it sort of blew me away a little bit that when I thought about all the aspects that probably have been ignored by almost everybody for so long. The article, and I'll quote it exactly, explores the relationship between human resilience and an architectural space within high-pressure environments. Let's start first with the idea of a recharge room. Can you tell me what that means? What's a recharge room?
Thank you, Joe. I love the idea of a recharge room. And this concept came from Studio Elsewhere, who is a, I believe, New York based studio of architecture that during the pandemic, they worked with hospitals in New York to support the nurses that were going through so much stress responding to the pandemic and all the patients. And what they did is create little rooms, both within the hospitals and outside of it, with inflatable structures that were filled with different pleasant sensorial elements, with images of nature, with sounds, with candles, with soft lights that would allow nurses to recharge. So they could take like a 15 or 20-minute break and sit down in this room and just relax. And they were actually able to pair with researchers and measure the level of stress of the nurses before and after. And they saw that there was a 60% reduction of stress by using these recharge rooms. And I thought it was such a brilliant idea that we should have them everywhere. And it tied very much with the idea of restoration that I had already explored during my thesis when I was graduating from UC Berkeley for the master's program. And the idea is simply that humans, we go through all these stressors during the day. We need our body to recharge and restore. And architecture can support us in doing that by providing spaces where all we can do is recharge and restore, and where the atmosphere is going to support us to do so. I always say that architecture is not essential to this process. We all know how to cope, and we have different mechanisms. We could call a loved one on the phone, we could watch a Netflix chapter, we could put our headphones on and listen to music. We naturally look for ways of decompressing and recharging. But the built environment is a brilliant one because it gives you a strong cue to do it as you walk in a space. And it's a healthier way to decompress that maybe, go to a bar and drink a beer. And it's like nature's way. Like you step aside and you look at a beautiful view or a beautiful room and you're able to relax. So I love the idea of recharge room. And in the case of the article, I was exploring in particular a project that I did for a client that was designing a firefighter station. And I thought that this idea could be very well incorporated there, creating restorative spaces where firefighters that also go through a lot of stress in their work could sit down and recharge and look at beautiful views of nature, have a pleasant atmosphere, instead of what a lot of fire stations usually look like, which are like depressing bare concrete block walls with maybe a TV and a couch. So we wanted to do better for them.
Yeah, I would think that, if you reverse that or just sort of looked at it in the opposite direction, being in a space that's really terrible would make it impossible to de-stress. It would make it impossible, to get strong again. And you described the cinder block walls and emergency room waiting in much of Canada are the most sterile places. Like they're the last places on earth you want to be when you're stressed. And that's when you're most stressed is when you're there with a loved one in an emergency room. So I can see that extreme being,
Exactly. And even if neuroscience hasn't been able to point us on what's exactly happening in the brain in these moments, we could say a more ambiguous way that there is a resistance, that there's energy spent in your body resisting all these uncomfortable stimuli. If there's noises, if there's fluorescent lighting, if it's maybe cold, if there's a lot of people and busyness that it's overwhelming, you cannot be present to support your internal needs and maybe the person next to you, because your body is spending all this energy in like resisting and like adapting to this atmosphere. So I agree with you, Joe, that difficult atmospheres actually can be detrimental and create this kind of environmental stress, like background stress, that cannot, it's not supportive, and we can do better.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Spaces that isolate us from the natural world can be incredibly stressful. So I get it entirely. I want to talk about the fire station. I think it's the Burlington Fire Station that you're involved with, and you spoke of in the article. You spoke of the process of easing into sleep. Can you explain the way that you design spaces to facilitate the process of easing into sleep?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was the main focus of this research informed design study, because one of the biggest negative health effects that firefighters deal with is difficulty sleeping. So we wanted to create a station where even during standby time, when night comes, there is the most well-informed place to support you have the best rest that you can. And I talked to some firefighters that said that resting in their, typical stations wasn't easy. They were in a room with other people. People were snoring. They were waking up. Then the alarm would go off, and all of that would be very disruptive. They would have poor sleep quality, and that alone affects so much our, mental resilience and health. So sleeping was a key part of the study and of the goals of this building. And so here's a good example of this research informed, because we're not following a recipe of like research says we need these factors to sleep well, so that's what you get in this design. No, it's research informed. We're still, as a designer, bringing the creativity and a narrative and a concept. So the concept that I suggested was this idea of the process of going to sleep. Sleep is not a moment, it's a whole process. We in our homes might start by reading a book or the newspaper, brushing our teeth, getting into our pajamas, having conversation with a loved one. Once we're in bed, having the night light, maybe looking through our phone or switching off our phone and opening a book. There's a whole process that helps us go to sleep. And the idea was that throughout the station, we were going to create different spaces for this process. So first, there was going to be this first decompression when firefighters come off the track and they go into the decontamination room. How could these spaces already be more than just a sterile room and already incorporate elements of nature and beauty to start this decompression? Then there was going to be this idea of cleansing the palette, because when you have a lot of stress and overwhelm, before you can relax or like before you can feel good, you need to like reset your senses, cleanse the palette, let it go. So there was going to be spaces to, through the observation of nature and through sitting or laying down and being in an atmosphere with less stimuli, like it could be very simple, white with some touches of wood, views of nature. You are going to be able to cleanse the palette. Maybe you can step outside, be between planters, hear the birds, like really relax. Then the next phase before going to sleep was going to be engaging emotionally, because once you cleanse the palette and you are empty of all that stress, there's space to put something positive in. And actually promoting positive emotions is the number one way of coping in a healthy way with psychological stressors. So in that process, they're going into the bedroom and into the bed. We're incorporating personalization panels with images that people could bring, family images, something that meant something to them, the ability to decorate, bring their plants, bring flags or whatever they wanted to that evoke those positive emotions, to then put in all this positivity inside, and then they would be way more ready to go to sleep. By that stage, we were thinking already of, light that supports the circadian rhythm in going to sleep, which is light that is not blue, that is warm, that is soft, and then the best conditions in acoustics, ventilation, temperature, and I'm missing one. You probably saw it in the study. There's acoustics, ventilation, there's temperature.
I think you mentioned light.
And the lighting, exactly.
Yeah.
The light, the ventilation, and the acoustics. Those are the main three elements that scientific studies have shown to support sleep. So those were going to be absolutely, optimized.
And natural light plays into that, Marta?
Natural light definitely plays into that and plays during the day. So to have a good sleep at night, during the day, you need to have your fix of sunlight, because that helps your circadian rhythms and your sleep hormones function adequately within your brain and your body and your system. So if you have natural light during the day, and we were definitely having this in the fire station, designing spaces where people are on standby waiting, but looking at natural light, they're not, big windows, good orientation for light, because that was going to help them sleep later. So yes, definitely.
Do you want to bring lots of healthy, beautiful natural light in your building and still meet energy codes? Try Solera from Advanced Glazings. Learn more at advancedglazings.com.
Now, air quality obviously is important in the design. Is there anything unusual about a high stress sort of situation where the air quality would have to be different than, say, like just a typical building where you want good air quality anyway? Is there something that's unusual about high stress situations where the air quality has to be something different than average?
There's nothing unusual. I think that everything that we applied to this building would work for everyone. In this case, we're focusing on a high stress environment and people that have professions that offer mental health challenges, because those are the people that could most benefit from these supportive environments and who are already battling the negative consequences of mental health challenges. But of course, those that could apply to anyone. It would be ideal that we could all be more conscious of those effects of the environment on us and choose to modify spaces to be supportive to us. And with ventilation, what we saw in this study is that many times in the sleeping rooms of firefighters, but also anyone in their bedroom, we are drowning ourselves in our own CO2, in our own carbon dioxide from breathing. Because if there's not adequate ventilation, the oxygen in the room will start to be replaced by CO2. And then as you're breathing, you have less oxygen at your disposal. So overnight, your quality of sleep is decreasing because there's not good air quality in the room where you are. So measuring and calculating the ventilation for those rooms was essential. And we found out we needed to replace the air in a sleeping room for a single person 1.4 times during the night, which means that all the volume of air that is in this room needs to be replaced almost 1.5 times during the night for that air to be fresh and to be healthy and to then allow you to wake up in the morning feeling more rejuvenated. And that applies to everyone. To try to have a crack in the window or have the vents on, some way of moving the air in your room during the night so that you are not drowning yourself on CO2.
Would you do anything passive in that design, Marta, like just opening and closing operable windows, that sort of thing? Or does that matter? Is there one approach that's better than another approach, or what's your feeling on that?
The design recommendation that I gave as a consultant was to add an operable window. That was not part of the original design, but to me that's very important because it's like very personal. There's people who want more of a breeze. There's people who want less of a breeze. And it's very important to support people's autonomy in a space. That also increases the well-being of people in a space when there is things you can adapt to your preference. So I think that having an operable window, it's always the most effective way to add ventilation, because if you're relying on mechanical systems, they could be not working, or they could be centrally operated and then someone could forget to turn them on at night, or it's like, when you can yourself open a window, you have all that ability and freedom to do so. So that was my recommendation. And I think that it makes me nervous, rooms and buildings where you can't open a window. So I always prefer to, include that.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. All right, I have to switch gears because I really want to make sure we talk about architecture with meaning, which is a platform that I believe you developed.
Mm-hmm.
S-
Yes.
So this website describes the mission as follows, and I'll just read it. AWM is a research-informed design lab. There's our research-informed. It's a
Mhm.
research-informed design lab, school, and community with the mission to advance meaningful architecture that supports the development of healthy people and societies, of course. Can you explain the purpose of the site, the website, in your own words, and talk about how that platform helps you to achieve your mission?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. So the platform of architecture with meaning is like a village for me of all of my different interests, because I'm primarily a designer and that's my training. But throughout my career, I've done education and taught lectures. I've done community development and hold community meetings and discussions and circles. And I've also dabbled in research and published some scientific papers and still really cherish being able to be part of research efforts. So for me, architecture with meaning is putting all of this interest in one platform because it represents my project and the different things that I want to be involved in. So that's why I created it as as a town. So we have the lab and we have the school and we have the community center and we have the ecosystem in which it's a library of resources that people can go and harvest and etc. And I see it also as a village that could grow in different areas. And so far, I've organized several workshops and also a 3-month long course in neuroscience for architecture. So there's been some activity on the School of Architecture with Meaning. In the community side, I actually started in 2015 creating a blog about how architecture influences human beings and connecting with people across the world in Spanish. So for many years, I was connecting through people online and having discussions on these topics. These were people who were volunteering a lot of resources that are now in the ecosystem of architecture with meaning and who really inspired me to keep writing and learning and creating learning materials. So right now I've moved all of these community activities to the Center for Conscious Design, and I actually organize for members a monthly gathering to meet other people that have the similar interest. Every month there's a different topic. For example, the next one is learning and exploration. So we're going to discuss how can architecture support learning and support exploration in both children and adults, etc. So the community aspect was always very important to me because in this field, I guess as in any newer field, you can feel very alone pushing it yourself, and you always need to connect with people who believe the same things that you do. And in the design lab, we have both projects in which I'm doing consulting work and also research projects that some of them I started years ago on, for example, how to represent sensory experience through drawing. And I'm always, very curious person. I like taking on different projects and ideas. So I like very much that in this platform, I can, explore all these different topics and then put them together and evolve through time and through collaborations.
Very cool. All right. Let's stay personal. Let's stay very personal with Marta for just a couple of minutes. You wrote an article, I think it was about a year ago, called Architecture and Well-Being, My Journey Exploring the Interaction Between the Built Environment and Human Fulfillment. Right? That covers our almost the purpose of my podcast. And it is a great read. Can you summarize its essence for us?
Yeah, totally. So I wanted to describe how had I arrived to the place where I was a year ago by looking at my journey. And some of it I've already been sharing about today, but it was very helpful for me to put it through words and realize that at the beginning of my exploration between architecture and human flourishing, which is what I always cared about. How can we feel better, live better lives? I was heavily relying on the sciences and on the senses, on what I could perceive. I was maybe 12 years old, 14. I didn't know very much about psychology at that point, or all the invisible aspects of well-being, like having a healthy relationship with yourself and with others, for example. So everything I could see is like, hey, when the sun is out, I feel better. When I'm in this ugly building, I feel worse. Therefore, to make people happy, we just need to make a better city. Why is this city so gray? Maybe that's why everyone's so depressed. And over time, I came to the realization that actually this intersection of knowing about people and the processes of health and well-being in the body and architecture was the way it helped us is through this process of becoming conscious. It's because when you know how you react to the built environment, you are empowered to make better choices. So at first I thought, oh, it is ceramics that make me feel good. Therefore, I need to create places that are covered with ceramics. And then I realized, no, it's that to Marta, ceramics have a personal meaning. I grew up doing ceramics. I grew up in the coast of Spain, which is a land that's always had a long tradition of ceramics. I have memories, positive memories in building with these characteristics. Therefore, by knowing why I love them, then I am empowered to be and to choose to add ceramics to my house. And it's this process of like self-awareness that really helps, because there's not one recipe that works for everyone. Maybe if I go and I cover your house with ceramics, you're gonna not like it, and maybe that's not the house you would choose to live in or the house you would buy. But if you know that maybe for you is stone, or maybe a certain type of tree that was in the land where you grew up that really truly brings you joy, you're going to be empowered to make that decision and add that into your space. And that's how, in some way, I came down to the idea of meaning, that a big part of this healthy, joyful relationship that we have with places that make us live better lives is the meaning that those places have for us, is the fact that we love them and that we can do in them the activities that we need to do to be who we are. And therefore, I realized that there was not going to be universal answers on how the built environment could support human thriving, but that every person that wanted to thrive more was going to have to start this journey of exploring, why their body reacts to place, how emotions are formed in them, and then to choose whether they want to add a certain element or not to their space, and to be able to ask exactly what is that they need to their architects. So I ended the article on a very open question too, that is it the role of the architects to do this process and get put on this kind of almost this psychologist hat and like conversate with their clients and help them come to this awareness? Or is it the responsibility of individuals and of public information and education to get there, so that then we can ask our architects what we need? And I still haven't found an answer. I think it's probably a little bit of both.
That's interesting. A few months ago, I had David and Marina from Fame Architecture in LA, and they do residential work primarily. And they spoke at great length about how far they go to truly understand those sorts of emotions and connections and in history of their clients in order to design for them very effectively. And, it seemed like a really deep dive, but if you really want to create that emotion for people, it seems to me that you kind of have to do that deep dive. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. I think that's a beautiful work. And part of the joy of being an architect working in residential is that you get to learn so much about people, and you can have this deep interest and sensitivity in wanting to know even what side of the bed people wake up in the morning and get out of bed in the morning to
Right.
design a place that's going to be most functional and, include all the elements that are going to make people happy. And I've seen many architects do that, from the great Richard Neutra, who created this vision of survival by design. He was like a pioneer of this work without having the neuroscience tools, but he very much believed that by knowing as much as possible about a client before you design, you can create places that really support to their needs and respond to them in a positive way. To other great mentors that I've had that would almost actually guide their clients in a visualization, during design conceptualization, and try to see what would be the most ideal place for them, and even what are some hobbies and some things that they have abandoned but that are very important for their personal development. And then she would try to create a nook for that writing goal or that painting that the client had never got to develop but that they really wanted, because she understood that helping people, creating space for activities that help people develop is a main part of bringing health into design.
Love it. Absolutely love it. All right. We've reached the point in the conversation where I have to ask my $1 million question. So this is the same question I ask in every episode, and I always ask my guests to answer from whatever perspective they'd like. So Marta, what makes a great building?
To me, and gosh, I think that I would need to give a lot of background theory to explain this term, but I'm going to see if I can explain it in a simple way. To me, what makes a building great is a combination of the physical and psychological attributes that I embody when I see or walk into the space. So embodiment is a word that I love and I use and I teach. I'm actually, one could say, more specialized in embodiment in design, and embodied cognitive science talks about embodiment, which is that, do you know about mirror neurons?
No.
Mirror neurons are neurons that repeat the action that you see outside inside of you. So when you see someone smile, the mirror neurons imagine your face smiling. And that's why you might also repeat the smile back to that person, or just feel happy by seeing another person smiling, because you are in your brain using the same muscles that activate when you smile, activate when you see, only by seeing someone else smiling. So that's the idea of embodiment, that we go through the world feeling people outside of us, but also objects. So think about the Pisa Tower that's a little bit tilted. Every time I ask my students what do they feel when they look at this tower, they talk about imbalance or some discomfort, or it's like, because we are exchanging our body for the body of the building, and we feel, that tilt. So we are always going to embody the physical qualities of a building, but also the psychological attributes. When we see a place like those buildings built by Gaudí in Barcelona, you can almost feel the creativity that the architect had, and the fun that the architect was having, and the consideration that the architect had in every single detail. As you put your hand in a handle that's perfect for the shape of your hand, you're like, wow, this architect thought of everything. So you are embodying those psychological attributes. It's like buildings are like our friends, From afar, you can already tell if they're having a good day or a bad day, if their posture is upright or not. So when we see a building, we're embodying it, and it's like we are empathizing with it. So I think that a great building would be one that makes you feel openness in your body, but makes you also feel movement instead of stagnation, and embodies psychological qualities like thoughtfulness, generosity, creativity, aliveness. And that's more of what I want to see in the world.
Very nice answer. All right. Before we go, is there anything that you'd like to share? Any sort of exciting news or anything that you'd like to promote?
Well, we are starting the promotion of the 2025 Conscious Cities Festival, which is going to be in March from the 21st to the 25th of March. And this is, again, a decentralized festival in which every city chapter is going to have their own event, some in person, some online. From the CCD, we're going to have several online events, and people throughout the world can join one day or several days of the festival, maybe attend an in-person event in their city, or just join us online and celebrate collectively this desire to get more conscious about how buildings affect us and learn a bunch, because we're going to have incredible guest speakers leading both practical sessions and intellectual discussions and sharing knowledge on all of those topics.
Well, perfect. Is there a URL, Marta? Did you want to share the link? Just say it out loud so that people will know where to go.
Yeah, absolutely. People just need to look for our website, which is theccv.org. And there they'll find ample information on the festival and how to become a member and join the festival. All members access the festival for free. And our membership is honestly really low because we want to make it accessible to everyone around the world.
Wonderful. All right. theccd.org. Marta Delgado, thank you so much for your time. It was an absolute pleasure. It was worth the wait to finally get to speak with you.
Thank you, Joe. I'm really glad that we got to speak today.
Take care.
You too.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Better Buildings for Humans. For more information on the world's best light diffusing and highly insulating glass glazing, please visit advancedglazings.com.